Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Sunday, December 3rd. We're talking about AMC stock. I'm going to be doing a quick outlook for the week. A lot of this stuff is kind of redundant, so I don't want to spend too much time on the what ifs and this and that, but I want to just kind of break it down to the most simple, basic parts. Might jump between a couple charts here, but suffice to say, there's two things mainly going on here. So number one is we have a break over what I would consider to be like the main downtrend here, and that already happened. I don't think that there needs to be another break, except for if you look in extended hours, maybe this very wide, kind of check here, which really wouldn't happen until you got back up to this area anyways, and it's sort of appropriately positioned to be around, this $8.90 area, $9 area, which is pretty much an intersection of the level that I would expect it to go to if this were to break up. We're not there yet, okay? So the main thing that we're looking for right now is we're looking at two things again. We're looking at this downtrend. It did break out here and go sideways. If you use one of the wider ones on the downtrend here, you can see that each stage it's kind of come across, it's found itself support again, and then pushed out, and it's continuing to do this over and over and over again, which is good. We didn't quite get over the final kind of outer creek here at the end of the week. You can see it just kind of barely walked up to it. Definitely a possibility that it breaks out there, but there's some other things going on, and we're going to have to kind of keep in mind that it's not always set in stone. When we look at the market, there's obviously going to be some times where you've got to wait for that confirmation. Right now, the big thing I'm looking at that I'm most concerned about is getting back over 732. While I understand, I've been talking about a possibility of racing up to the high area here, there's a lot of things that can happen before a potential move back up to 15. I do think, I know it seems a little bit odd perhaps for some folks, but I do think it's pretty necessary that we're going to get up here at some point in the future. And I'm not talking about far off. I'm talking about in the near future, whether we go down or up first. That's kind of a bigger question, If we're talking about just mirroring outward, this technically would be, I'm just going to be straightforward. This would be like a drop really low and then come up. I don't think that's what's going to happen, because the way this set up is it didn't really set up to have that really low drop right now, but it did set up as an S-curve would. And I need to point out that this is a very typical setup for AMC. One of the places we saw this that's probably really easy to recognize is back in March of 2022, and I'm just going to kind of move to it quickly here if I can. Basically, in that time, we had a big, massive kind of upthrust, and then we broke down and we went down pretty far. It looks like going a little bit slow here, loading. I apologize for that. We'll get to it though. Here we go. You can see it's a really similar style breakdown. You have the initial, what I call cat ear one or whatever. It's really resting on, as you can tell, this kind of a midway support, supply demand area where we've had rejection or support at different times, and then it goes beneath it. Once it confirms, it drops. I did take a fractal analysis of this area, and it's very similar to what we're experiencing right now. But there are some key differences. So number one is this actually was in the midst of the range. It wasn't below the previous range, okay? So that's a key difference. Number two, you can see here that the reversal didn't include, and I'm on the 4 hour, the reversal here that is pushing up on this cat ear, while it did look like, hey, it's breaking down, it didn't include it becoming overly oversold, right, beforehand. Now, when we consider that and we look at where is this kind of intersection, it is on the top of the previous area, which was the little accumulation before the upthrust and then the distribution that happened, okay? This happens pretty much every single time there's a breakdown, right? If we go to, and I've talked about S-curves a lot on this channel, and if you're kind of I'm over it, well, there's always more to learn, right? And one of the things is where do they come from? Like where does that kind of midway point come from? And it usually has to do with the previous top before that initial breakout, because there's like an effort to sell back down through it. Again, you can kind of see what I mean. It's got a very similar vibe as well. So it usually comes from that previous top. Very similar, although this one's a little steeper, right? Very similar to what we experienced back there in March. So again, like I'm looking at this like, hey, it's possible that we're not quite there yet. Now, are these exact halfway points? They're not always perfect, but they're usually pretty darn close. So if you measure from the tip top, you might find that, no, they're not really halfway. They're more like that first ear is halfway. If you measure from like the breakdown point, which is usually like a little bit lower, tends to be pretty accurate, like to near halfway. But you can obviously tell that this is, no, it's not really exactly halfway. And if we were to go up to that cat ear, kind of midway between them, it doesn't seem to go to anywhere particularly, right? It just goes to this level up here where there was an earlier distribution, and then it's not really matching what we see at the top. That's the same as it was in March. So I don't think it's a perfect 50-50 kind of thing. I think it has to do with just where are you going, right? And like sometimes the S-curve can be pretty shallow and sometimes it can go pretty far. So when I look at something like this, it would be easy for me to say like, well, it's got to be 50-50, right? Like it's going to do this and drop all the way down to 490. Well, hey, guess what? I got 490 on another chart as a possible target. So that's not out of the question for me. But at the same time, we just noticed and we just looked at it like, hey, there was another one that had a completely different setup, and this one only went to 572. I actually think this is more likely because I know that this major downtrend is here as well, around that like 570 to 580 area, okay? There's other reasons for that, but here's the thing. There's a missing piece here, right? And the missing piece is quite simply like what happens at the end of this range. Right now, we had this push up that looked like it was going to be some continuation. Came back down to check that creek. I think we've done it. I think we've done that check. It made a slightly lower low, if I'm not mistaken. I can always double check, but I'm pretty sure I got that one right. This had a low of 654. This one has a low of 653. Slightly lower low, and then it rebounds up. Could that be a spring-like action? Yeah. I mean, we've just seen stuff like that over here where you make a slightly lower low and then it recoils and goes back up. Now, from that point forward, what would you expect? Well, just like anything else, it's got to jump the major creek. And I think right now it's pretty self-explanatory where I think that is. If you don't have this major line drawn, it's not a big deal. Take the bottom from around Monday, November 13th, the tops during this kind of midway breakdown here. That goes from November 16th through November 20th, and then ultimately the tippy top on Wednesday, November 29th. That's kind of the main breakout point for me. And I think it makes sense because this would be an SOS, right? If you jump over it, find support, you'd end up with a little SOS at the top of the range. So all of that being said, that's where we need to be for continuation. Basically, we need to get up above 735, find support, and then we can go. On the other hand, if we push out above 724, and I'm pretty confident about that, roughly that number, where that is, I say roughly, maybe it's a little bit higher. I think I moved it down a little bit. 726, sorry. If we jump up and push up slightly above 726, let's say we hit 727, and it starts sliding back down through, the moment, in my opinion, that this thing starts going back down through right here around like $7, you're going to have some trouble. And we know that $7 is the previous bottom area. I don't think you want it to come back up again and then slide back down through. So 705 is really, really critical. You can see that there's a really evident, if not obvious, downward creek right here where these two tops are, right? That's the directional resistance here. If we push up and we come back above the top around 730 and then we slide back down and start breaking down through these critical levels at 705 and 7, you know, this is very likely just a rejection if this is a distributive top, and it could easily come down and make new lows. And I do think that the price target would be quite low. I do think we're going to probably see it get down to about 570s, okay, 575, all right? So breakout level above, roughly 740 back down to 725. Then you want to find support and continue up. Breakdown levels, if you come up slightly above 726 and then you come back down through it, you're likely going to have that breakdown and continuation of the S-curve. This is a reversal. And I know some of you are probably thinking like, well, it definitely looks like it could be an S-curve. You just showed us examples. What about examples of a bottom? Well, this is an example of a bottom, right? Like every S-curve could turn around, and every turnaround could become an S-curve. There's almost never an example out there of a bottom that doesn't have some kind of a presence like this, where it could go either way. And that's kind of the nature of it. That's how they, trap retail into thinking one way or the other. There's some pretty serious buy-ins here, volume-wise, on these bottoms. I do think that the selling volume doesn't look as strong as the buying volume, especially the buy-in that we saw on Friday. So yeah, I do think there's a major buy-in that's happened. I think as soon as you get up above here in SOS, you've trapped a bunch of shorts that were maybe in this lower area, and it's going to probably move up pretty quick. My targets are straightforward. I think you're going to be looking at $8 and then all the way up to like $9 and then eventually $9.50. I think it's very straightforward this time because that's kind of where we've anchored ourselves, is on these really clear lines. 9 being like the previous top and bottom from over here. 950 being roughly like the liquidity center point here, and then 8 being the liquidity center point here. So really straightforward. Getting all the way up to 14 would require some kind of a probable redistribution. Basically, you'd have to have some kind of an S-curve in reverse. Now, there's one scenario that I want to highlight that I think is really important, and that's a scenario that I think a lot of people won't like. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it stops at 8 or if it stops at roughly 9. Makes no difference. There's a scenario here in which you could easily see a distribution occur, where you basically have like kind of a fake out pump and then it comes back down later. This is pretty typical for AMC. It actually happens quite a bit where you come back up to redistribute and then you end up with a breakdown after the fact. And in these particular situations, you want to see that through. You want to make sure you're paying attention to this, because if it's a reaccumulation, great. If it's a distribution, not great, and it's going to be bad, right? This is where we start coming into maybe that idea of like, well, we may be testing this like outermost area, and we get this like fake breakout or something. You're going to have problems. If something like that were to occur, I do think it'd be time for us to go down, and I still have that 490 target as a probable area of making a landfall, and I do think that at that point we'll be talking about a bigger reversal. It might seem out of the question that something like this could result in another upside, but that's just not true. Like, there's been plenty of examples on AMC where we've actually made pretty serious nosedives and then almost immediately, we've reaccumulated and then had some really massive pumps. This is a scenario that I think has me the most curious, because I feel like it could end up becoming a big trap, both ways. So this is one I'll be watching for pretty closely, because anything else is fairly straightforward, right? Coming down first, you come low, and then you come back up, right? It's easy. And then going up first, you're just kind of like, oh, we reaccumulate, and we just, continue up. And that's that, right? It goes on a tear for, 20 days, and then it drops. But this particular situation with the whipsaw, I don't know. It just feels like something that AMC would do, and I definitely could see how the operators on this stock like to have those like massive initial moves, and they make you think with the buy-ins that they're going to go really far, and they don't really go that far at all, and then they redistribute, and it's kind of like a micro version of maybe what we see over here. So watch out for that one, and that's pretty much all I got for you, though. I think this week you've got those key levels that we just talked about, and everything else will follow. So with that being said, I hope you guys have a good one, and I will talk to you later.